Georgia State's Dell McGee looking for immediate results. It's Locked On Sunbelt.
You are Locked On Sunbelt, your daily podcast on the Sunbelt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, David Schultz. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's talk a little Georgia State. We bring in our buddy Brady Weiler from Panther Talk. What's Dell McGee done? He showed up in the middle of, well, not quite the middle of spring practice, but spring practice was already done by the time Sean Elliott decided to move on and take a job, I think, on South Carolina's staff, right? The tight end coach. And Dell McGee's got to come in there, put his staff together, and decide what they're doing for spring ball. He's already done a great job recruiting for 2025. He's brought in a bunch of new players for 2024. Who is the starting quarterback, and what kind of culture is Dell McGee trying to build at Georgia State? Also, they got one of the more interesting schedules you'll ever see. We talk about that. Let's get to it. He's Brady Weiler from GSU Panther Talk. He is Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Now it's kind of doing the previews of the previews of the previews. Sunbelt Media Days coming up in a couple of weeks. We got our guy from GSU Panther Talk, Brady Weiler. Brady, how is the offseason treating you, if there is such a thing as the offseason?
Definitely the offseason right now. Yeah, good to kind of get back into the zone where, like, when the Sunbelt East representatives and media days got announced today, it really feels like the season's just around the corner. Because when media days come, it's like practice is right around the corner. And when practice is coming, games are not that far away. Plus, we're less than a week from College Football 25 being released. So all of the vibes are about the return of college football in every sense of the word.
All right. So how exciting. What has the level been since, the whole Sean Elliott to Dell McGee hire? What's it all been like since he was hired and named head coach of the Georgia State Panthers?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as he had the job and started putting his staff together, they got their plan for spring practice. And they were getting ready, recruiting. And, the day after his press conference, Dell McGee had meetings with every player on the team. And so from that point, they were making personal and also just, professional on the football side evaluations both ways of how's this going to work out. But very clearly, he still wanted to go out, get some players that he was going to recruit in this cycle, but also make inroads in the 2025 cycle. And so, for fans who are following on Panther Talk, especially recently, it's felt like every other day there's been a new commit. And, there was a stretch where there's an official visit weekend in the summer, which has been rare for Georgia State to do. Obviously, Dell is bringing those in now, where something like 6 or 7 guys popped the same weekend. And so it all came in rapid fire. And so a lot of people have thought, following Georgia State, that this is a job that, if you put in the work in Metro Atlanta, you can get kids to commit here, especially from the metro area. And that's already happening. So the fans that liked the hire and believe that Dell could bring all of that are already seeing that, even though not a game's been played. And, in fairness, not a one of those 2025 kids is committed, signed through their commitment yet.
Right. All right. So let's talk about, let's back it up, because if people don't remember, right, you had at least 2 practices in spring ball before
the morning of the 3rd is when the news came down.
Okay,
there was so practice that day.
All right, so then tell us how Coach McGee handled that, because how much is he changing? He's got to get a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. Are they bringing in their systems? Are they tweaking their systems to what they were doing? How do you approach that, and how much time difference was there between when Dell McGee was hired and when they started spring practice again?
Yeah, so yes, they are changing the systems. It's going to be a pro-style offense, which is going to be new. It's been more of a spread, runny option type under Sean Elliott, and that is no longer going to be the case. And Also, NFL concepts coming on the defensive side with DC Kevin Shearer that I know some of the players, we talked to Chris Davis after the spring game, one of the linebackers, and he appreciated that he had that NFL experience to bring that in. And so I'm curious to see what shape that takes, or even what kind of shape the defense takes. Still a little bit early to tell from my vantage point on that, but certainly when games happen, we will. But yeah, it was a couple of weeks. They put the staff together and got a basic install in. I would say probably the staff wouldn't say that everything that they got in, they wanted in, but I think they probably were satisfied with the time that they got. And, in the middle of spring practice sounded like a real daunting thing, but because it was only 2 practices, they still got a lot of work done during the spring period. And then some of those decisions were made where even some of the guys that the previous staff had brought in December did not stick with the program. A lot of new players have come in total, north of 30 new players. Not all of them Dell's players, but with his players he brought in, and then some that have stuck around that the previous staff recruited. So a lot of new faces. So I think the proof was always going to be in the fall camp pudding as far as this kind of being a cohesive team. I think there was going to be some transition anyway, just because you're losing a lot of players, namely Darren Granger, and then guys like Marcus Carroll, Robert Lewis, who lost through the transfer portal. But I would say probably everything's back on schedule, and it goes to now continuing the work they're doing, recruiting, and also when fall comes around, truly getting into the install for the offense and the defense.
Yeah, I would presume it would be a very basic install because, it's tough enough when a new coaching staff comes together, in December when these things are usually done, and you're moving forward over the holidays, and you got about 2.5 months to get it together before spring ball happens. So, the install was not only for the players to be all on the same page, but for the coaching staff to be all on the same page. So I would presume, I don't mean this as insulting, I would presume it was rather elementary just to get the basics down. And I wouldn't be surprised if you asked how much homework that these players had. They were probably given a bunch of homework that they were going to have to learn on their own, when they can't be around the coaches.
And I think this is where the hires Dell McGee made helps him out, because Jim Chaney is the offensive coordinator, done a million installs, maybe literally. He's been a coach for a long time. He knows offensive football. He knows how to do like the nuts and bolts of it. And same with Kevin Shearer, has been a long time defensive assistant at the NFL level and in the SEC power conference programs. And so I think he deferred to the guys he knows have done a lot of this type of stuff to on the fly have a plan. And this is where the benefit of, you do have a lot of players that are coming in that did not play in the spring, that, okay, the spring might not have been the best install or whatever, but a lot of these guys are going to be new anyway. Like I mentioned, 30 plus that are new. So you're still going to have a lot of work you're going to have to do in the fall. And this time in the summer where, they've changed the rules where it's not like you can do full on practice, but the coaches can be a lot more, direct on like, this is what we need you guys to work on. So I'm sure the players have an idea of what they need to go through as they're doing their summer workouts. And especially now that everyone's on campus in anticipation for fall camp next month.
Talking to Brady Weiler from JSU Panther Talk. All right, so let's talk about that big word that everyone started using a few years back, the culture. What is the culture that Dell McGee is trying to create there in Atlanta?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to say here, in credit to the last staff and Sean Elliott as head coach, he's not taking over a disparate bad situation. On the field, Georgia State had not taken that final step, and maybe we're never going to take that final step under Sean Elliott, but he made it a real professional unit. A lot of the stuff before he got there, where even the staff before with Trent Miles, there were still some lingering issues where, this guy's, there's suspension here on the field, unsportsmanlike piling up there. A lot less of an issue, especially by the time Sean Elliott was gone at Georgia State. And so he's not starting from total ground zero, is Dell McGee. And so that certainly helps. But you got little clues. Again, I spoke to players after the spring game with the press conference, and Chris Davis on the defensive side of the ball mentioned that Dell wants them to shake 3 people's hands every day in their everyday campus life. Also, he had mentioned that he had been going to see someone a couple months ago. a little bit iffy on the specifics, but there was some financial services event that he had gone to before the spring game that week. And he found out that the people who had been running that event had already seen Dell McGee before him earlier in the week. Dell kind of going around, meeting all the people around campus, making those connections. And so that feels like a change. And the players, it seemed notable that was a change. And the other part of it is Coach McGee's a known quantity in the South in recruiting. Like a lot of these guys, whether they were seriously looked at by Georgia when he was there, would have come across him and would have known his name. And especially players from the Columbus area, which is where Dell made his name originally as Carver Columbus High School head coach. So I think all of that together, and like I mentioned earlier with the NFL concepts, and I think a belief that the staff has people on it that know how to put them into positions to make the NFL. I think that all of that has helped with some buy-in internally and externally, and we've seen some of that. And the rest of it, we're just going to have to see. You know, a lot of the good stuff has already happened as far as what fans want to hear, players are buying in from what we can tell. But the next step is how it kind of comes together into a product on the field in the fall.
Talking to Brady Weiler, GSU Panther Talk on Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. All right, that's a good idea, just in general, just to go around shaking hands with 3 different people on campus every day. That could absolutely build some, team student unity. So that's a good idea just in general. Let's take a time out. When we come back, we'll ask Brady the always obvious question: who is the Georgia State starting quarterback? And do they have a quarterback battle for the first time in a long time? We'll do that after I tell you about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I want them to never stop. But as the playoffs have winded down, we get fewer games, and all the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Let's get back to it with Brady Weiler from Panther Talk, talking Georgia State football. Who is the starting quarterback, and do they have a true quarterback competition for the first time in a long time in Atlanta? Let's jump on the field. As you mentioned, I always like to ask this question. Coaches don't like it. Reporters don't like it. Podcasters don't like it. Don't care. Who is the starting quarterback for the Georgia State Panthers?
Yeah, so don't know.
That's usually the answer.
But my gut, and I've said this on my podcast, Thursday Night Podcast, and anyone I've talked to about it, I feel like Pitt transfer Christian Veilleux will end up being the quarterback when all is said and done. Because at the end of the day, when a new staff comes in, they usually want to have their guy, quote unquote, in control of the offense if they have that option. And they went out and added him. He was the first quarterback that came in from the new staff. Also added a couple of transfers, both quarterbacks, both from Middle Tennessee State, that they're in the mix as well, as is Zach Gibson, the Georgia Tech transfer who was added by the previous staff. And I'm not ruling him out of winning the job. And I think that if it is Zach Gibson who ends up being the quarterback when Georgia State takes the field against Georgia Tech, his former school, at the end of August, he'd be steady. I don't know how high the ceiling is, but he's a very experienced FBS quarterback who's played at the power conference level, and so you'd have some trust in. But Veilleux's got a big arm, and he has got some years after this one. This would be Gibson's last year of eligibility. So aside from just kind of the cliche, this staff's guy, quote unquote, the fact that Veilleux's going to have some more years after 2024 to keep developing would be another reason to go with him. So I'm not going off of anything I've seen, because Veilleux was not at spring practice. He was added after spring practice, or after joined in the summer. But that's my feeling right now as I read the quarterback room.
So we're looking at a true quarterback competition at least to begin with.
Yes.
Did he say when he likes to have it? Again, I've always bring this up as well. It doesn't matter when I find out or when you find out, although you would like to find out to tell other people.
Right.
And the players usually know before we know because they're doing it at the practice and they're at the practice. They know he's playing well. But how quickly does he like to do it? Does he wait till the end of camp, like those last 2 weeks, so everybody can rally around the leader?
Well, this is the thing we'll find out because it's his first time being a full-time head coach at the college level.
Right.
But I have a feeling, again, just kind of the program he comes from, that he's learned under Kirby Smart. I would be surprised if there's any public affirmation of who the quarterback is until, if not the week of, like the day of. Like, I think this will be played close to the vest, even if it might be like if there's an open practice in the fall and we see who's been taking the first team reps, it might become obvious. But I feel like it's the kind of like, from the coach's perspective, it's kind of the last thing you can hide, right? Like, even if everyone kind of knows, if you've got it in the back of your mind, there's another thing you have to prep for, you're going to use that to your advantage. But I think we'll probably be waiting to find out, but could be proven wrong. Might, like, first week of fall camp might come out and be like, this is who the quarterback's going to be.
Well, that I would be shocked about.
I would obviously appreciate that from the perspective of immediately having that knowledge of where we're going from, but we kind of have to deal in conjecture in this business, and so that's why I kind of lean there, and I'll be kind of sitting here waiting to be disavowed of that notion that he's going to be the guy, just because I think that's how it's going to work out. But like you say, it's the first true quarterback competition since well before. I mean, yeah. Because it wasn't so much a competition when Darren Granger won the job. He took it mid-year. Like, Cornelius Brown was the quarterback heading into 2021. 2020 would probably be the last time,
right?
And even before then, like, there hasn't been this much like, I named there's 4 possible guys I could list as the starter, and there's never been that many potential quarterbacks. So,
all right. Well, maybe you know what?
Different era.
He may not have a decision by with 2 weeks left to go before we get around to, when they start prepare. Camp is over and they actually take 2 weeks to prepare for that first game. We'll get to that because there's a huge opportunity for Georgia State. They do not leave the city of Atlanta until October. They get their first 5 games in town. We're talking to Brady Weiler, GSU Panther Talk. You already brought up the 2025 recruiting. And they're bringing in guys or having events on campus in the middle of summer. Have you been able to talk to any of the recruits or what it's been like, or any of the players that have been committing? Because it does seem, I think, as of, early July that, Georgia State is the number 1 recruiting class in the Sun Belt. And I think that's a little bit of a switch over the last decade or so.
I will certainly defer to my partner at Panther Talk, Ben Moore, who is the recruiting guru, who does all of the stuff, covering all the visits and giving everyone the Georgia State, and just kind of around the city of Atlanta does a lot with the recruiting stuff. So I can't speak from any real position of authority on that side of things. But I will say that I think this is what people, like I was talking about earlier, this is what people were hoping to see as Georgia State fans when Dell McGee got the job. And they're 75th right now because, we can be frank about it, not everyone has 17 commits. Sure. A lot of the schools at the top do, and that's why they're at the top of the rankings every year.
Right.
But I even think the fact that there are this many commits and there's so much being paid to recruiting this early on in the cycle relatively is something that fans are happy about in Atlanta, because it's showing the work that Dell is putting in and his staff are putting in to assemble these classes. And, I would be shocked if everyone who's currently committed ends up signing, just because that's the nature of this business. And,
right.
Already they have had players from the 2025 class get poached and go to commit to other schools. And so that's going to keep happening, but 75th is where they are right now, which might not stick. We'll see where they end up when all is said and done. That is light years ahead of where they were as an average under Sean Elliott. And I think a reasonable place to, like, when the dust settles, if they are exactly where they are right now, when everyone else has their commits, I think that would be a reasonable expectation for what Dell can do, because I don't think anyone who knows about this stuff was seriously going to say that he was going to come to Georgia State and be like a top 40, top 25 recruiter. Georgia State can't play in that ballpark.
No.
Like, you're really shooting to be, as a G5 program, near the top 50. In the 60s and the 70s, there's a lot of them. If you can get into the 50s, that's where you have seen some of the programs like South Florida, who's making some waves, and like where you saw Cincinnati's of the world that made the college football playoff.
Sure.
So 75 would be far and above better than Georgia State's done in recruiting ever. And also, I think it would be kind of a, it's a reasonable place for them to stay and land. And I think whether it's this exact group of recruits or whether some leave and some more come in, I don't think the work's ever going to finish until every signing day is done and you're going to keep seeing them add. And it's, there's certain holes right now that seems like Dell McGee wanted to add for the 2024 product, but I think he'd say the most important work he can do is all of the future classes starting with 2025, where he can really build out this roster. And you're seeing a lot of speed and size added in ways that maybe the last staff wasn't as interested, compelled to do. Everyone's got their own view on what the recruiting is, but he's not looking at it and thinking he has to find every diamond in the rough. He's going out and getting guys that have rated as the best recruits in Georgia State's history of recruiting. And you're still going to have to find some of those lower recruited guys at the G5 level, just the nature of it. You're going to have to find some diamonds in the rough, but he's not looking at it as like it. He is taking a leap in recruiting as far as the intent, and you're already seeing the fruits of that labor.
It will be interesting to see. Obviously, like you mentioned, tough to get those 4 and 5 stars, if not impossible. But if he can get a couple local products to stay at home instead of sitting on the bench for 2 or 3 years at a Power 5 school, although they may get NIL money to do so, then they could not necessarily sit on the bench at Georgia State. Then you can get some, that can be a little bit of a, continuous thing if you get a couple of people to stick around and play and stay at home and play football in Atlanta.
Yeah, and of the players currently committed, you can see the full list on 24/7 Sports, Panther Talk, where Ben really does cover all the recruiting stuff. Already,
stop pumping up Ben Moore already. We know that you're the total
hey,
genius. You're the brain power behind Panther Talk. Stop pumping up Ben Moore already. Jeez. As if his ego isn't big enough as it is.
It's fair enough. But I just wanted to mention some of the names of places where commits on the current 2025 class have come from. Discovery High School, Grayson High School, Shiloh High School. What do those have in common? Loganville as well, Gwinnett County, in the area around Gwinnett County. So Dell certainly knows where bread is buttered in the state of Georgia as far as the place to look for recruiting. And I think he's already made some of those commitments there that, aside from he might be getting those guys to fully commit and sign down the road, we'll see how the cycle plays out. He's showing to all those coaches and future prospective recruits that he is interested in targeting those areas and he wants to recruit those kids. And I think that type of goodwill and showing that side of it, where it's such an intent to recruit in these areas in Metro Atlanta, in the state of Georgia, has maybe been missing from Georgia State football the last staff, call it what it is.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more time out. We'll wrap things up with Brady Weiler from Panther Talk after this. We talk about this really daunting schedule that Georgia State has, one of the odder ones you will ever see. We'll do that after this. All right, we've cleared the 1,300 subscription plateau. You guys are the best. 1,306 as of this recording. Still a little bit short of where we want to be, getting towards the 1,400 by the end of the month, and then 1,500 by opening day. As far as I'm concerned, that's August 31st. You guys can do it. I know you can. We'll get into more of the previews of the football. Football is basically gearing up again as media days is happening in a couple of weeks. Really appreciate it. Please hit that like button when you see it on social media and get your friends and family to subscribe. It is a big help. Thank you so much. All right, let's wrap things up with Brady Weiler from Panther Talk featuring the Georgia State Panthers. He talks about this really odd schedule where Georgia State does not leave. Forget about the state of Georgia. They don't leave Atlanta until October. And then they get a 4-game road trip after that. So they have a good opportunity to get off to a good start, or else it could be a long season for the Panthers. He's Brady Weiler from Panther Talk on Locked On Sunbelt. Talking to Brady Weiler from Panther Talk, GSU Panther Talk, 24/7 sports on Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. You mentioned the good recruiting class so far, like 75, because that has a lot to do with quantity, not necessarily quality, whereas his former coaching staff mate, now up in Central New York, Fran Brown, Syracuse had like a top 10 class for a bit, but they got like 28 commits. They're like 31st. At least they were earlier in the week. Not a whole necessarily lot of 3-stars, but they do have 28 commits, and that is not something that they've had before. We'll see where that, like you mentioned, maybe flattens out a little bit when everybody else gets the same amount. All right, let's talk about 2024, and it is an interesting schedule. I'm not sure if Georgia Tech is going to overlook Georgia State. I'm not sure how good Georgia Tech is supposed to be. But again, the Panthers' schedule, they go crosstown to play Tech. They're hosting Chattanooga, hosting Vanderbilt, hosting Georgia Southern, and hosting Old Dominion. They could, it's a tall order, but they could get off to a tremendous start. Or maybe they have to get off to a tremendous start because obviously the back end is going to be much more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you just can't take too many absolutes in this, this era of college football, especially at the G5 level, just because right now the transfer portal means every team is going to lose good players every offseason, in addition to the players who are going to be graduating. And so there's a lot in flux for this Georgia State team. And I have mentioned multiple times now that there's 30 plus players, is going to be some new faces, but that's going to be the case in similar differing volumes, but it's the case everywhere. So we don't know much. I think when you look at the schedule, there's 0 games that Georgia State has 0 shot to win. Like Georgia Tech, they're currently about a 20-point favorite, I think. I feel like the line's going to go Georgia State's way more than it's going to get bigger, but Bowling Green went to Atlanta last year and won, I think, by multiple scores against Georgia Tech. So I think that's in the realm of you could win it if everything, if it goes your way, if you can hit right away. But Georgia Tech, good team, made a bowl last year. It's not like you're going to Bryant-Denny and playing Alabama or one of these programs that you're going to be massive underdogs and it'd be, scoring is the success for you. And you look across the schedule. I mean, we know the Sun Belt's tough. I mean, you talk to all the teams, you're aware, like there's a lot of games they're going to be underdogs in. I'm not saying it's like an easy slate by any stretch, but I think Vanderbilt as a home game against, power conference team that feels pretty winnable. They're coming off of another losing season. It feels like a pivotal year for Clark Lee there. You would love to not have to play both App and James Madison on the road, but that's kind of the breaks. Right. Those are on paper right now the toughest games, but even there, you lost by 2 in Harrisonburg 2 years ago with the last staff. So you can play those teams close. You lost by 4 to App State in Boone in 2020. So point of which to say there's no game that you immediately have to put an L next to. And for a team that's maybe going to be finding itself in the early stretches, not having a schedule you look at and just feel like you're not going to be competitive in any game, or if there's any games you can just look at discouraged by. I don't think that's the case. So I think that helps them. I think it helps fans because I think you can talk yourself into a good year. And look, the fact of the matter is, while people weren't satisfied that it felt like 7-5, 6-6 in a bowl game was the ceiling under Sean Elliott at Georgia State, that's still the expectation. Georgia State fans are not going to look at this as a schedule they can't get 6 wins on. And I feel like keeping expectations measured heading into year one with the coach is a smart thing to do, especially the situation like this. First-time head coach, you got to give guy a little bit time to grow into the role, develop his roster. But, if we're sitting here after the season and they go 4-8, 3-9, even 5-7, that's going to be a disappointment relative to expectations that have been set. So we'll see how this team can really, come together. And I think we talked about the quarterback. That's obviously the most important thing. It's going to be a pretty new offensive line and a new offensive line, like blocking scheme. It's not going to be the same as it was. So even the guys that are coming back are going to be learning a new offense, run blocking scheme, and all of that stuff ultimately comes down to chemistry and just how well they gel as much as it does individual ability. And, a lot of new faces in secondary. You got Gavin Pringle and Isaiah Guy back at corner, but you also bring in Sam McCall, Kenyatta Watson, transfers from Texas A&M and Georgia Tech, respectively, and Jerron Gilmore from Tennessee Tech, another cornerback. So they added some pieces there, cornerback, who wins those jobs and who really is able to step up, and how well they're going to step up. It's going to determine, I think, a lot for the defense, just because you look at the stats last year, passing yardage and just passing defense was a bit of an issue. So I think if I had to set the expectations around like areas of the game that they need to be good at and improve at, I would circle those as the ones to watch. So I can't sit here and give you a flat, like, this is how they're going to finish and these are the games they're going to win or lose, because I don't know what this team or the rest of the Sun Belt is going to look like. Sure. But I think if the offensive line is able to gel, if they get the right guy at quarterback and he can at least not lose them games, and if the secondary, all that competition springs them into more life and they take some steps there, especially with the teams on their schedule early on, Georgia Tech, heavy passing team. Chattanooga, the FCS game, certainly not a gimme if you ask any Georgia State fan about FCS games. Right. Passing team. Georgia Southern, passing team. So they're going to get tested early in those games in their residency in Atlanta in the secondary. And so that's why I look at that as another group that is going to determine kind of where this team sits when all is said and done.
Well, it kind of feels like, and we'll wrap things up with Brady Weiler from Panther Talk 24/7 Sports. I think I was doing Southern Miss, and they have a shot. I think they start out at Kentucky, but then they have like 3 games that they could win all 3, lose all 3. They could be anywhere from 1-3, 3-1. I doubt they're 4-0, but they could be 0-4. And just as much as you said, they're all winnable ball games. They're all kind of losable ball games. But if they start out and they play Tech tough and play Vandy tough, and somehow beat Georgia Southern and ODU, then they're 3-2. Does that set up the rest of the season? Because I kind of feel like with Southern Miss, I think that Jacksonville State game is huge, because then they get a week off and then they get the Cajuns. Because if they're 1-3, they're going to be with an off week. They're going to be looking at a new coach probably. But if they win that game, it could propel them to big things. If somehow Georgia State is 3-2 or better, that again, the schedule is hard at the end. So, 3-2 could easily turn into 7-5, and they've had a great season.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would be surprised if anyone on the Georgia State staff has had a schedule quite like this before, especially down to your one road game in the first month. Not even just you're not really going anywhere, but the one place you're going is in the same city.
Yes.
They do have to take advantage of that.
Right.
Because as you say, especially if they beat their rival Georgia Southern, that'll be a nice one into the second bye. Assuming they beat Chattanooga, even if they lose to both the power conference teams, which I wouldn't say Vandy is a gimme to lose. I think that'll be somewhat of a coin flip game. We'll see what they're at. I know they brought in, the New Mexico State brain trust to kind of build out that offense. So we'll see how that goes for them. It was a good G5 team last year. But say you go 2-2 there in the first month, and one of them wins over Georgia Southern, your rival. You're probably feeling pretty good as a team heading into October, and you've got to, because after Old Dominion, you only have 5 days. You go to Marshall. Then a week after that on Saturday, you go to App State. You go to UConn, which you feel like you can win. They handled business against UConn last year in Atlanta. But then turn around, you go to James Madison. And so that's the stretch that, it's the other side of the coin where you got all these games in Atlanta and everything's lines up for you in September and the beginning of October. Well, it flips once October turns to November, and mentality and where they're feeling after this first stretch of games, what they do in Atlanta, will probably do as much as anything else for that stretch of games where it's going to be tough, but if they're feeling good, they're feeling confident, that could go a long way to helping them through that tough stretch of the season. And I say it every time, like, the schedule is just going to be what it is in the Sun Belt right now, because the construction of this league, it's a tough football league. So does that give them very little favors there as October, November comes around? Yeah, no, it's a brutal stretch there, but that's just going to be how it is. There's always going to be something you point to on everyone's Sun Belt schedule where it's like, boy, those 2 or 3 games in a row is pretty brutal, because there's a lot of good teams in this league. So I would, caution fans from getting too much into the schedule game, because I think that's just how it is every year in this league right now. Just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I'm a big believer. You got to win the home games. You really have to win the home games. I'm a big believer at all levels, but mostly in college. Winning on the road. I don't care what classification is. Winning on the road is hard and should always be thankful, whether you win by 1 on a fluky play or a bad call, or you win by 30. Winning on the road in college is hard, and so you have to win at home, even if you are the better team. Winning on the road is hard. We remember all those Sun Belt teams a few years ago, taking down those Power 5 teams. Every single one of them did it on the road. He's Brady Weiler from Panther Talk. All right, pump up 24/7 Sports and your boy Ben Moore. What's going on?
Yeah, well, right now, kind of looking outward at other teams, I've been doing a preview series of all of the opponents and kind of setting the stage for Georgia State fans who might not be tuned into these programs, like who they're bringing in, who they've lost. And so right now, this past week, put out the piece on Old Dominion, which is game 5. So getting ready, as I just finished talking about that brutal stretch in that last question, to talk about that brutal stretch coming up with the Marshall game, game 6, and then the second half of the schedule.
He's Brady Weiler, Panther Talk, 24/7 Sports. Always appreciate it, my friend. Have a great time at Sunbelt Media Days. Always appreciate your time. Be good.
Thank you. You enjoy your time as well.